Welcome to this Roundtable 2 parallel session on industry academia engagements in partnership with MCCAI and FICCI. I am Dr. Ramakrishnan Raman, the Dean of the Faculty of Management and Director of SIBM Pune, and I am the chair of the session. Let me have the privilege of introducing the moderator for this session along with the panel members. Mr. Ravin Mirchandani, Chairman, Aurora Parton Limited, will be the moderator for this session. May I please request you, sir, to please come onto the dais. A round of applause for the moderator, please. The other panel members for this session are, here, sir, Dr. Sudhir Mehta, CMD, Ekla Mobility. Dr. Sudhir Mehta. Thank you, sir. Ms. Rama Kirloskar, Joint Managing Director, Kirloskar Brothers Limited. Thank you. His Excellency Matthew Johnston, Minister Counselor, Educational Research, Australia, New Delhi. Thank you. Mr. Manoj Apte, Head Learning and Development, Persistent University. Thank you, sir. Mr. Rutvik Punglia, Regional Head, South Asia, University of Western Australia. Thank you, sir. Dr. K.M. Susindran, Head, Academic Alliances, Academic Interface Programs at Tata Consulting Services, TCS. Thank you, sir. Ms. Bhavna Manwani, Director ANZ Global Subsidiaries Group, Transaction Banking from ANZ. Thank you, ma'am. Now, may I request Mr. Ravin Mirchandani, please take over the session.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this panel, in which we will discuss industry-academia engagement in the year 2023 and what both industry and universities can do to facilitate something that is much more effective. My name is Ravin Mirchandani, and I'm in fact an alumni of the Symbiosis College of Commerce. Very long ago, having passed out in 1988, 87, I think. I drew the short straw because two ladies in the audience today, Monica Kennedy and Mrs. Anita Patankar, decided that I'm going to be here. It's quite amazing to see Symbiosis after almost 30 years. When I joined, it was 200 students, and the lecturers had to actually wear lab coats because that was the only way to tell them apart from the students because everybody was so young. And a lot of students had crushes on the lecturers as well, both girls and boys and boys and girls. So it's quite amazing to see that this has become quite a big university. You have an eminent panel here today, and it's in fact quite an honor to be on the stage with them, and I'm sure you will learn a lot from them, particularly from Indian industry. We have Sudhir, who is an entrepreneur and an innovator, and who formed Ekka Mobility, which makes some of the most sophisticated electric buses and electric goods transport equipment vehicles in India today. We have Rama, who at a very young age today is Joint Managing Director of India's biggest pumps company, and who will bring a lot of insight into industry and manufacturing. We have Matthew, or should I say His Excellency Matthew Johnston, from DFAT, from Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of the Australian Foreign Service, who is here to talk about education and research and Australian involvement in India. We have Manoj from Persistent, a company that's grown twice in the last 2 years, 2x in the last 2 years, and has had to scale its training and industry engagement as well as academic engagement. We have Rutvik from the University of Western Australia, whose job is to identify young talent in India to come to Western Australia to the university. We have Susi from TCS, the big daddy of the IT industry in India, whose company for the last 21 years has run an engagement program with academia, today employing 650,000 people. And finally, we have Bhavna from the Australian New Zealand Bank ANZ, who's traveled all the way from Bombay to be part of this. Thank you, Bhavna. So to the panel then, we start with an open question and then have some very specific questions. I'm hoping we run it tight and that you have the opportunity to ask some questions from the audience. If you do have questions and we do get to you, please raise your hand, and when the mic comes to you, state your name and institution and ask the question. So the first question, and perhaps we can start this with Matthew, is how can industry and academia strengthen their collaboration to ensure that academic research and innovation are effectively applied to address industry challenges and drive economic growth? Some countries do this really well, for example, Australia. Others struggle. They have the theory, right? But putting it into practice seems very difficult. So Matthew, your thoughts?
Well, thank you. Yes, it's a very good question. And I don't think it's actually an easy thing in terms of if you think about government and what is the role of government in facilitating, for industry, for educators, for academics and others. We won't do the doing of this. And so we need to put in place, I think, frameworks to really encourage this kind of collaboration. And then we need to get out of the way, frankly. So that's the perspective that I have from a government level. And the Australian government is really investing in this. The National Reconstruction Fund, coming after the pandemic and the global sort of economic shocks that we've all experienced in these past few years, they've really prioritised changing the culture on both sides, industry, in incentivising cultural change on industry and research to bring these two things together much closer. So we've got a number of programs aligned with our advanced manufacturing strategy, where we're really trying to tap all those great brains in Australian universities to really contribute to building new industries in Australia. So there's been a lot of investment, seed investment, to really change cultures on both sides and really bring industry and researchers together. I've emphasised cultural change quite a few times, and I think the panel this morning of those wonderful students, there was a couple of them that said, I need to have a master's before I can do an internship and this kind of thing. So one of the pilots that we're running through our universities is called Advanced Apprenticeships, where we are challenging our universities to develop sub-bachelor programs that are shorter in time, focused to Industry 4.0 and really embedded in small and medium enterprise in Australia, to really give students and industry that taste of working with each other much earlier and not after someone has already done 4 years of a bachelor's, 2 years of a master's. I think bringing those opportunities far earlier into the system is a role government can help play for both industry and educators, and I think that's really important, and I think we heard it from our young people on the screen earlier today as well.
Thanks, Matthew. In fact, doing an internship after doing a master's seems to be upside down, because the whole point of internship is to help you understand, do you want to spend your life in this particular specialization? So, Manoj, then coming to you from the industry perspective, a brief comment on what Matthew's just said, perhaps about having internships ahead of even graduating in your bachelor's to help you identify your career options or specializations, and then also what industry and academia can do better.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, thanks for inviting me here. And as the moderator said, we have actually doubled as an organization in the last 3 years, which was absolutely phenomenal. And I think keeping up with the pace in terms of the processes and the systems was absolutely a big challenge for us. So I head the learning function, and this is my day job, to really take care of our employees, their upkeepment, and keep looking for opportunities where we can actually collaborate with universities and institutions. So one of the things which I have seen as a challenge is the overall industry exposure to the students, whether it's an undergrad or a master's program, is a big challenge. And being on this side of the world, for us, it's practically impossible to collaborate with too many universities. So what we do is we pick up a couple of them and really go deeper. One of the examples which I think would really work for even other industry specialists to work with is to partner with 1 or 2 such universities and design very specific programs which meet the industry demand. And we have done it with a couple of them ourselves. and we have seen tremendous value, and then let those programs be even open to other industries, right? So I think doing that, embedding the curriculum that is relevant to the industry upfront in the earlier part of the curriculum is absolutely essential, and get some of the industry experts on the board of studies and also define that curriculum, right? One last thing is, I think while we have been sponsoring projects with academia and some of the other institutions, I think the biggest challenge that I have seen is the domain knowledge. So I think if that can be embedded upfront, because otherwise it becomes a very academic activity, and that is what industrial folks won't like it, right? And so the only reason where I would really get attracted is if the researcher is talking and understanding my language, what we do in the business, and bring in that whole empathy and design thinking, I think is absolutely essential to really up the whole game of getting academia closer to the industry.
Thanks, Manoj. Susi, coming to you then. Your company, TCS, has for 21 years done pretty much what Manoj is talking about. You've worked with various academic institutions. You've tried to design programs so that students coming out for your very aggressive intake are already pretty much ready. You've worked on their labs. You've worked with universities even in Australia, not just in India. Your comments on what has this experience been for 21 years? What's lacking today? Where are we headed from here?
Yeah, good morning. And first of all, I would like to thank Symbiosis and the G20, the Uni20 organizing team for inviting me and all of us here. And been with TCS for 27 years. And when I joined TCS, the strength of TCS was 5,000 employees. Today, it is 620,000 employees are there. And there's a massive at least we double down our numbers every other year. And all credit goes to the institute like SIU, because we hire mainly from campuses, right? 2 years back, we hired 100,000 fresh talents across universities in the world, right? I think we seamlessly integrated them into TCS. I think that's how it is. And it wouldn't have happened unless we have a strong industry-academia collaboration. We started this 22 years back when we had the great minds of Indian university, vice chancellors, directors. We conduct this event called Sangam. Sangam is event for great minds. I think, so we deliberated and we felt as a company, we need to invest this industry-academia collaboration. So we started this exclusive group. What we do here is we've been part of the boards and academia. We design the curriculum. We help them to change the curriculum quite often, not just 1 year, 2 years down the line. Every 3 months we give advice, and we have our own value-added courses. We designed an engineering degree course, syllabus, curriculum, and we help the faculty development programs. The numbers are mind-boggling, which I will tell later. And so this is very, very important because industry needs to solve the problems, industry problems, and we need a skilled workforce. What we have in academia is the ideas which should translate into solutions and the monetary value. This is where not only skilling, we have been collaborating with academia in setting up the excellence, center of excellences, and funding some research projects. We do all the things that helped us in growing to this level. And to talk about a few things, the Google OS and Apple Mac OS, the origin of this OS came from the academia. They built this OS, right? I think then they took and they made modifications and whatever you see here today, like that. This mobile phone, OLED, or Siri, or Wi-Fi, GPS, all this research happened in academia, and industry took and we took and we customized for our needs, right? So this is a great example. What we have a mobile, it's unless the academia and industry collaborate, all the invention would not have happened. So it's very important. We need to have a framework. We need to know how to run programs. We need to know how to have the research programs and governance, and we need to deliver it on time because industry need it on time. So that is very, very important. And thank you.
Thanks very much, Susi. The last academic view then before we come to industry, and I go to you, Ruthvik. If you could briefly just go over your experience now with now an Australian university, Uni20, on the question of academia and industry engagement.
Thanks so much, Ravin. I mean, listening to all the industry academics here, the University of Western Australia, which I represent, has a number of initiatives on offer for students when they're pursuing their undergraduation or graduation degrees on an ongoing basis. And we all heard this morning about the internships are so important to students, and they always come and ask when we talk, do you have any internships embedded in the program, etc. But what we are now heading into is slightly different approach, wherein we have a Bloom Law on campus where we encourage students to have their ideas from a proof of concepts to an early stage of commercialization. So instead of spending those hours sitting in a classroom and listening to academics and learn theory, instead, why don't we give them opportunity to make their hands dirty, get some hands-on experience, present these ideas in front of all the industries who might be interested in, and take it to the next stage of funding as an example. So that's the trendsetter that we are embarked on for the last few years now, and it has successfully helped us to take this forward. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ritvik. Coming then to the three industry views here, maybe we can start with Bhavna. We have a more in-depth question to you on this subject, but your thoughts, your brief early thoughts on industry-academia engagement.
Thank you, Ravin, and thank you to SIBM for inviting me here. I think one main point I'd just like to highlight here is that today industry hires for attitude and trains for skills. So what we feel is really missing in our education system is the skill training. And if you look at, WHO has defined these 10 critical life skills, which include critical thinking, decision-making, empathy, and self-discovery. We are very theoretical in our approach to education, but if we have students coming out from universities with the ability to look at that knowledge and apply it to decision-making and use interpersonal skills to work in a slightly complex collaborative setup, that I think will actually increase the employability of students into the workforce. There was a very interesting comment in the earlier session, which I heard from a student to say that, we are asked to think out of the box, but we don't know what the walls are. I think that applicability of skill sets, because knowledge can be learned, but the skill development early on actually helps them acclimatize into industry.
Thanks, Bhavna.
Thank you.
Rama, then coming to you. You come from the traditional powerhouse of the Indian economy, also have both exposure in India and overseas for your education. What are your thoughts on how industry and academia can work together to support the manufacturing sector?
So first of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's an honor to be here. I would agree with Manoj in what he said earlier was, I don't think students have enough exposure to industry. And for a company like ours, Kirloskar Brothers, that specializes in fluid management, right? We do manufacturing and design really end-to-end for our products. We make pumps, turbines, hydro turbines, steam turbines, valves. And other than just the product, we also work on large-scale projects. So your Sardar Sarovar Narmada Nigam project, right, is one of the largest irrigation projects on the planet. We're literally lifting the entire river for irrigation. So the pumps that go there are very, very large. And the reason I'm saying this is because I'm trying to set the context. This kind of engineering takes a lot of training. And what we notice is students, when they are recruited, we call them graduate engineer trainees. They're straight out of college. We we spend at least 3 to 5 years training students just so that they can productively contribute to the business. And I think what academia needs to do is really have long-term collaborations. Now, as you said earlier, I studied in the US and I was at MIT in Boston. And what I noticed with the Harvard, MIT, Cambridge ecosystem or the Silicon Valley ecosystem is you have industry forming partnerships with academia, sponsoring labs, sponsoring professors, sponsoring research, right? And the students are actually selected by the industry partners pretty early on, maybe in sophomore year. I'm guessing that's second year of college. And they actually work on those live industrial projects for 2 to 3 years. So they understand the business. The industry partner exposes those students to various aspects of the business so that that student can contribute in a more meaningful manner to their live projects. Those colleges incorporate such internships, give credits to the students so that it's actually part of their coursework. It counts as towards their degree. They get credits for this, and it's not just a check in the box. And eventually what happens is those industrial partners absorb those students into their company. And it turns out to be a win-win situation because, well, the colleges get good placements for their students and the industry partner gets trained full-time employees that are productive very early on.
Excellent point of view. And in fact, I'm just going to interrupt and ask Dr. Raman to comment because the repeated theme that you get from industry in India is that except for the top universities, such as the IIM or Symbiosis, for most other colleges, people come out with a piece of paper that means nothing, really. They've got a degree that said they spent 3 years in university, and then companies, all the companies here have to spend a lot of time investment in training them, which takes another 900 days maybe for them to get competent in their jobs. So that's a very pertinent point that Rama has made here as well, which is the difference in the systems overseas over what you have in India. I'm sure that is changing. I think the audience would be very interested in your comment on that.
Thank you. So, I mean, a lot of insights that I'm getting about what industry-academia collaboration can be for it to foster research and creativity and innovation. The gap between industry and academia has been there since ages. Possibly 20 years back also, there would have been a panel discussion where people were talking about how can we bridge this gap between industry and academia. And 20 years, when I was doing 20 years back, the same topic was there and it continues to be there. It will continue to be there and for another 15, 20 years is my guess. That gap will not be closed unless industry is looking for people who can lead the industry and not just be ready for the industry. The industry is always looking for industry-ready professionals who can hit the ground running from day one. That's what is the aspiration that the industry has. Why can't the industry look at industry-leading people? If you change the game for industry leading, then you'll start investing in universities to collaboratively work with them to set up innovation centers, research labs, which the students can work so that they can possibly lead the industry, and they are definitely good in this. I don't say that it's not happening now. There are few, it's the 80-20 concept. It's only 20% of industries are actually looking at it, but 80% of them are still looking for coolies for the corporate world. Let me put it like that, where they want people to come and work for them from day one. That is what is actually people are looking at, industry is looking at. I don't say it's wrong. You need people, but you also need to make it 50-50. You need people who can possibly work for them from day one, but they should start investing in academia, in research centers, innovation labs, so that this talent which is there in the university can become industry leading and not just be industry ready. So that's my take on making the industry-academia collaboration to make research and innovation happen in a grand way.
Thank you, Dr. Raman. Coolies for the corporate world, very provocative. Maybe we'll come to you, Sudhir, and I'll ask you a more in-depth question, which just follows on from that first question. Your industry is the electric vehicle and clean mobility industry. You make electric buses, hydrogen buses even. India's first hydrogen bus, which had the Prime Minister Modi as his first passenger in Bangalore. There's been a steep learning curve in the EV industry, no matter where you are globally. 3 years ago, no one knew anything. 2 years ago, talking to the Tatas and Leylands, they were scratching their heads, wondering how they're going to move from ICE to electric vehicles. You led the path there in many ways. You, along with JBM and the others, followed. I'm interested from your perspective. Were you supported in some ways by the quality of students coming out and by the quality of education that had taught students in India? Or did you have to lean overseas for that knowledge? So in particular, what collaborative initiatives now from your learnings would need to be undertaken between academia and the EV industry for us to not lose the race as we did in the solar industry for India to remain where it is at the moment, you know, number 2 or number 3 in potential to lead the world?
Thank you, Ravin. First of all, as a proud Punekar, let me welcome all of the delegates who've come for this Uni20 summit. I think we are in the right city to discuss this in India, because if for all of the industry, academia engagements that's spoken about, ours is possibly one of the cities where it's happening to some extent. I think let me set the context for why this is important, really, and you may know most of these statistics, but as a country, we have about 300 million students. We have about 260 million in schools and 40 million in universities. So this is very, very important for us. We have the population of Europe as such, which is engaged in every year. We are putting out about 1 million students a year. So that's the context for which India faces this very important challenge, opportunity, drawback, whatever you want to call it. So it's fundamental to growth in any area that we want to do. Coming to manufacturing, innovation, all of these things, this is certainly one of the big, let's say, challenges that we are facing. Let me take a completely different example, and just to explain to you, this is what we do a lot of business in Israel. And possibly that's one of the few countries which has actually cracked it. And to my opinion, it's very simple. It comes from 2 or 3 basic criteria. First and foremost is very simple, 3 words: just do it. I think everybody, and you're right, these discussions have happened for 20 years. I've been part of many discussions. The problem, I think, is we are all trying to preach to the other side. Industry is always telling academia what they should do. Academia is telling us what we should do. But we are never on the same side of the table. And we always feel happy in telling the other side what they should do. Israel is one country which has actually cracked it. And the best example of this is you go to that country, and it's not unusual that you will meet somebody who's been in academia, then 2 years later they give you a card that they're running a startup. 2 years later, they will give you a card that they are part of the government. And then 2 years later, you will find them back in academia. So that is unfortunately, this is not happening, at least in India and in many other countries, even including. So one, fundamentally, we have to break this. There is no boundaries here. It almost should be a mandatory kind of thing. Mandatory is a tough word because that means somebody is enforcing, which is never good. But there has to be cross movement. That's the only way we will understand each other's perspectives. For the size of, let's say, technical ability that we need, the example of the mobility industry, this is the single biggest manufacturing change that's going to happen in the last 100 years. 45% of India is the auto industry for manufacturing. If 50% of that is to change, means you require people who are going to change 20% of manufacturing in India. Now you translate that into numbers, you're already talking mega millions of people. Do we have them? The answer is no. We don't even probably have 10, 20, 50,000 people. Again, this is very fundamental, comes back to engineering, interest in engineering. It comes back to the fact that many of our institutions produce engineers who then go out to become investment bankers or go out to sell shampoo or to sell soap. This is all wonderful. But you're never going to create an innovation ecosystem unless fundamentally people want to get into what they were trained for to some extent. So that has to be, there has to be alignment of what people feel they want to do to what they learn. Today, that's not there. And the last part of what I want to say is that this is an opportunity that we can't miss. This is something we learned in COVID. We learned in the city of Pune. COVID was one instance where actually everybody came together. Why? Because everybody was afraid of their lives. Everybody was afraid that this was such a major event happening. So do we really need some kind of an event like this to to bring us together? The answer is no, we shouldn't. And I think this is an issue where a lot of debate has happened. All the answers are known. Unfortunately, I think as a system, we need to come together and do it without ascribing, let's say, reasons to each other.
Thank you, Sudhir. Matthew, I'm interested in your opinion on this subject. Australia actually does a very good job between industry engagement and academia, and it shows whether we look at what happened in the defense industry or what's presently happening in clean energy with the hydrogen industry. Any thoughts as a rejoinder to what you've heard here about Indian industry and academia versus what can be learned from Australia?
Yeah, it's really interesting to listen to all of the industry on this panel and to sort of hear of the need of the person that you want to employ to help you grow your business and then in turn contribute to economic growth. And there's a tension, isn't there? There is a real tension within universities, this debate of, well, we need them to do this skill, to do this job based on this technology at this time. And that was something that was in my mind. Like, do we need... I think we need both. We need the technical skills and you need that competency, but you also really need to teach people or encourage people to think critically, do all those, I hate this term, but soft skills, you know, that interpersonal relationships, all of those sorts of things. How do people relearn what they need to do? How do they adapt? All of these kind of things, which you actually get from knowledge and from having a broad experience that you get at universities. And the students, to go back to them again, they talked about how they like that model of, you know, being able to do the things that they're passionate about and bring it together, and that will stimulate their ability to then be able to, you know, contribute. So there is that tension, I think, between getting exactly what the industry wants immediately and then having people who can be taught but quickly. And so it's maybe a bit of a mixture of things. So, you know, in Australia, we have a well-developed vocational education and training system. It's competency-based training informed by industry demands. Industry designs the curriculum. Industry govern with government and with educators the outcomes they want to see from those people. Primarily, those courses are shorter. The certificate levels, sub-bachelor, are shorter. There are a maximum of 2 years for the most advanced vocational qualification. So maybe thinking about an education system, and maybe this is where universities think about that relationship of bringing industry in very early, not just sending people for internships, but bringing them in for the design of curriculum, for taking maybe a more competency-based approach that's integrated with the other things we know need to come from graduates of a university, the critical thinking, analysis, all of these kind of things that are absolutely essential for everything that's done. How do we kind of bring those as a bit of a hybrid kind of approach? I think you're starting to see that in India. In Indian universities, you're seeing that valuing of competency-based learning. But really what we're talking about is how you change that. And I think perhaps what Australia has been able to do and is continuing to do with the support of government, but also the innovation of our universities, is bring those industry demands early into the curriculum and understand that and co-design it. And I think it can be done locally. You don't have to do big structures on this. You can do, you know, here in Pune, Symbiosis with the local industry can really do that and do it in a way that makes this university, you know, highly attractive for students. So there's a few different strategies you can think about. Universities in Australia have taken it upon themselves. They're using digital tools to bring that work experience into the curriculum. They're, you know, not just about going for internships. They're looking at different strategies of work integrated learning as well, really at the curriculum design stage as well. So really getting that balance between, all right, industry, we want to send students to industry to give them experience, and industry want that, but we also need to make sure they're capable of engaging with that. So I think maybe we need to just reflect a bit on flipping how you bring the industry more into a university classroom, and be a little bit inspired maybe by some of the vocational systems that do this fairly well.
Thanks, Matthew. I'll linger on this question just with one more panel member, and I'm going to ask Bhavna to comment. Bhavna, you went to the Indian Institute of Management, the premier institute for management. So I'm going to ask you to bring to this panel your thoughts, because IIM does a great job with industry involvement, right? There's a lot of exposure in terms of internships, but also involvement in the coursework. So I'd like for you to comment on why IIM does it better and what there is to learn. And then from the ANZ perspective, a good panel always has a little bit of tension. Matthew brought up the tension, and we had a provocative statement here about industry only looking for coolies to fill jobs. Is this what ANZ is doing?
Thanks, Robin. So I think I'd just like to talk about the IIM experience with a personal anecdote. When I actually went in for my IIM interview, in the interview lounge, there was a pamphlet which said, 90% of our students are male, 92% have work experience, and 97% are engineers. And I was, a female, non-engineering background with no work ex. Somehow I managed to make it to the other side. But I think today, if I was on that panel, I would insist on 100% work experience because, I think, one of the panel members brought it up earlier. It just makes a whole difference to the way you value the education and what you take away from it. At ANZ, I think, I mentioned the point on skill-based training. We do have a very large operation out of Bangalore, which looks at all our global processes. And the key gap that we see are around the soft skills, as well as being able to create a career path which excites the students, because typically if you're looking at a banking back office operation, you need to ensure that it challenges the students enough to be able to make a career path and grow in that direction. So there is a huge amount of training which goes into getting people up the curve, getting them to operate in a very complex regulatory environment, looking at cross-border linkages, and those skills obviously do develop on the job, but the softer skills is where we feel that when people have that skill set already built in, they tend to look at their career experience in a different manner.
Thanks very much for that, Rama. Bhavna. Now coming to Rama to discuss this same subject from the manufacturing sector. You are from an industry that in many ways underpins everything we do in the economy, right? You make pumps, turbines, you're contributing, as you said, even to the Narmada project. But you've built this over the last many years, 150 maybe years, largely on your own, right? You're a family business that has built a manufacturing competence, employed people, trained them, and grown to the extent that you are. What is missing from your perspective today in India that academia should know? And what would you like to see changed in the next 3 years to facilitate your major growth ambitions?
So I think as far as industry-academia partnerships are concerned, I think the fundamental question to think about is, why does industry come to academia for such partnerships, right? We are all for-profit organizations. And in order for us to stay profitable, we need to have a competitive edge over everyone else. And for having that competitive edge, we need to create IP that gives us a technological edge over everyone else in the same business. And when we come to academia, and let me be a little more frank, right? Companies like us, we already work with academia. It's just not in India. We do it with American institutes, we do it with British institutes, we do it with European institutions. Why don't we do it in India? I think fundamentally, there is a legal framework that is missing. That's the first. Protection of IP, ensuring that your students are sensitized to non-disclosure agreements. I think they need to be sensitized to what is ethical behavior in business, because ultimately IP is very important for companies, for any company. And the fundamental concern is what happens to my IP if I work with academia? How do I ensure it stays private? Because that is really that really determines who's the market leader. So I think having a good legal framework that protects IP, that's the first point. And the second point would essentially revolve around the universities incorporating this kind of work into their main coursework, right? It has to count for that person's degree. Otherwise, there's not going to be any sincerity. It's just going to be a check in the box. And like I said earlier, it has to be more long-term. It has to be at least 2 to 3 years. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense for the industry partner to spend so much time, money, and effort in training people for a few months, because neither is that student going to be able to contribute, nor are we really going to be able to train them in anything substantial. And I think it's only a win-win if it's longer term, there's a legal framework there, then it's something that is workable.
Excellent answer, Rama. I mean, it's in fact very probing because you've hit the root of why industry doesn't really involve academia in India. And I'm going to ask Dr. Raman if you can comment on that, because it talks about intellectual property protection and the soft skills that Matthew talked about, students knowing how to be able to deliver what the company wants, but protect what they're developing as well. Is that something that academia is thinking about in India?
I think that was a very pertinent point about protecting the IP and ensuring an ethical behavior. There is a lot that has to be done when you're comparing Indian student with a student from, say, Japan. That happens to them by culture. Put about 30, 40 students in a room and make them take an exam. I'm talking about Japanese students with which we have collaboration as Symbiosis. They don't look at this side or that side and give the exam and get away. Do this with a set of Indian students. You need possibly have four people who will go and monitor that nothing wrong happens. So culturally, it has been so that do anything but crack the exam. Right from kindergarten admission to an IIT JEE admission, it's been always competitive. So anything is fine as long as I'm able to crack that cat snap, or that's been the mentality, and that has to change. A lot has to be done, not only at the higher education level, possibly at the school level, for an ethical behavior to be imbibed by a student when he or she is going in for their classes, or while they pursue their schooling or undergraduate. And institutions like us have made courses like relating to ethical behavior as a mandate in the management program. So we have courses that have been included as a part of our MBA program. But at the postgraduate level, it becomes too late for them to go and accept it. But in my view, this has to happen right from the schooling. System has to change, and the change is happening now. And I'm sure that it's a question of time that we will have this as a practice, that the students' behavior becomes ethical. But I completely agree with you. There is a gap there, and that has to be closed so that the corporate gets the confidence that they're able to give such projects to students for them. And companies like yours then trust on Indian educational institutions as well when it comes to collaboration for such sensitive IP-related projects.
So this is going in an interesting direction. We have the lack of framework, and then we have a cultural issue that needs to be addressed. Both very, very big jobs, because it needs a nationwide and a national government framework, in fact, to be put in place. But there's one element missing, I think, and that is also speed of development. And one of the reasons industry doesn't come to academia is because there's a different concept of deliverables and the time it takes to deliver. So for example, in my industry, we work in 90-day cycles, 90 days for proto, 90 days for testing, and 90 days for industrialization. So that within the year, in our 270 days, you have a product on the road. When you bring that sort of concept to universities, it seems almost breathtaking to be able to do development like that. So I'm going to pose this question, in fact, to Manoj from Persistent, because I know you do a lot of this. You do new product development. You want to do a lot of engagement with academia, and I'm sure that the speed of delivery is also a big challenge for you. Your comments?
I totally agree. So, we are primarily into product engineering and services. So I think speed, deliverables, and outcomes are extremely important for us. So just to kind of build on the topic that we're talking about, I think if the research topics are uh, industry sponsors, which can help us solve our problems, I think will be something very interesting to really look at, which will also bring in something which is time bound, something which is outcome based. Interestingly, there is a Desh Foundation, and I came across Deshpande Foundation through Dr. Deshpande, who is the founder of Persistent. It's not owned by Anand Deshpande, but there is another Deshpande. So, very interesting concept where this foundation works with MITs and even I think IIT Madras, where the challenge is the research work that is done, it's not having any commercial value. The outcomes don't have the commercial value, and that's where I think it's important if we can productize the research outcomes and tie that with some commercial value. I think it and not every research, of course, can be productized. Of course, there will be something which is fundamental. But I think if that is done, it just brings in a lot of tangibility to what is being done. There is a lot of purpose behind what is to be delivered. So from our point of view as a product engineering company, I think that what matters to us is, if there is a research work and if that IP, as Rama was also saying, if that can be protected and if it is a time-bound project, I think there is a tremendous value in collaborating with universities.
Do you see any other barriers from the perspective of Persistent or your industry that is stopping a closer engagement between academia and your industry sector today?
I don't see it as a barrier. I think it is as I said, it has to be the problem driven, because I don't think I have come across any university reaching out to us with a very clear expectation that we will work with you and we will help you solve your problems. I think if that can also be done, it could be a game changer. And again, as I said, Deshpande Foundation kind of foundations would also help fund those projects, because I think that's another challenge universities have, that where do you get the funding from. So I think for us, what is important is productization and time-bound delivery.
We worked with the IIT Madras, for example, and they came to us with a program where their number was $100,000, so it was 75 lakhs, to work with them to fund a program for research. The problem we had was their inability to be able to deliver in 270 days. So we'd fund it, we worked with them, but what should have been a 9-month program ended up being a 3-year program. Now, from an industry perspective, it costs you 3x first, because you're now sponsoring it for 3 years, because you're overcommitted. It's too big to fail. You need to see the process through. From the university perspective, there's a lack of understanding of what industry wants, and again, no framework to be able to define what the outcomes are, have penalties like you would in our day-to-day lives. And so it was a very instructive process for me to deal with what would be one of the premier institutes of India and still struggle through the process of funding a program that would take 3 times as long and have no particular framework to measure outcomes. Coming to you then, Matthew, again, from the Australian perspective, you're here from Australia, you're helping the engagement, particularly with the new wave of friendship between Australia and India as well. What strategies do you reckon should be employed to promote industry-sponsored research internships, allowing students to gain exposure? Now, you've talked about this from the perspective of Australia, but perhaps we can look at it from the perspective of India and Australia. Is there an opportunity, for example, for Indian interns to be involved with Australian industry, or the other way around? For example, my company would, we bring interns from Germany, we bring interns from France, because they have programs to send interns to India. That doesn't happen from Australia. Is there something that we could talk about, given particularly the new visa regime that came about when Prime Minister Modi was in Australia? Is there somewhere for interns to move back and forth in an environment that doesn't compromise immigration policy?
Look, really good question. But I think you're right. Like, you do see examples of these kind of international exchanges between industry and academia, between countries, and internships. We commissioned, and we think that's an opportunity actually between Australia and India in higher education, but also for industry, and sort of taking up some of the benefits from the free trade agreement that entered into force end of last year. So we commissioned in Australia a look at strategies for work integrated learning, how you can embed it in universities, build in international internships. And what the literature and the data sort of showed was there is great potential. I think more for Australian students to come for internships in India, perhaps, given the scale of industry in India, given the innovation in the sectors that India is really strong in. I think there is a lot of potential, and some of our universities are looking at those kind of relationships for being able to embed their students and their researchers and PhDs in and with industry in India. So, I mean, that's great. We got an academic piece done that showed, yes, there's great potential for work integrated learning. How do you do it? So we're funding two fairly small pilots with Australian and Indian institutions backed by key industries to look at taking advantage of the NEP liberalisation of dual twinning and joint degrees, and really trying to test, well, what would a work integrated learning curricula look like in that kind of context? Can I be honest? It's probably been harder than I thought to get it up and running. You've really got to get across some of the things that the panelists have talked about. Getting over that kind of, what have we always done in terms of curriculum design within the institution, and then getting industry to see that there's a value for them to spend their time and what they get out of it. But we're persevering, because I think once you kind of find a model that can work, you learn your lessons, and this is what this is about. It's about, it may fail, and I'm kind of okay with that, because then we learn something from it, and then we can look at how do we scale these kind of models. So there's a real opportunity, I think, in India with those academic structures that are changing, the liberalisation. You've got industry who's here, innovating, wanting to get the best talent. And I think we've got universities from Australia that are very interested in giving their students experiences here. And we have a number of government-funded mechanisms to kind of do that. You're right about the visa and immigration issues, but there's always, where there's a will, there's a way around these things. And you're right in pointing out the mobility partnership that was signed between Australia and India a couple of weeks back when Prime Minister Modi was there. That's very much focused on these type of profiles of young people that can really support industry in both countries. But unless we get the mutual benefit for both parties right at the beginning, and I think there is a role within the university sector to look at how they do structure some of their curricula, and so we want to test that and see how we can kind of do that for the benefit of both. And ultimately the students will vote with their feet and will pick these kinds of programs. We're already seeing that now. For where they choose to go and study either in India or Australia. So I don't think I've been particularly structured in how I've answered it, but I think there's lots of different things we're trying to do on the Australia-India front to make that work. And if others are interested, I know my colleague Monica Kennedy and I would be very happy to discuss how we might take these sorts of things forward. But both governments are putting in place the frameworks, back to my first answer, between each other to try and have this kind of innovation happen. We're at a really unique point to really take advantage of that for both countries. There is that genuine relation there and that genuine commitment to work. And we've now got in place a lot of frameworks. So let's figure out how we actually make it work.
Thanks, Matthew. Ruthvik, then coming to you, maybe a couple of comments on that, and also the follow-up question to you, which is just a little bit more specific about developing the skills to be long-term sustainable, right? When I went to uni at the Queensland University of Technology, my marketing professor, Sumon Wong, said our MBA would have a 3-year shelf life, and he was absolutely right. Most degrees you have today have a 3-year shelf life. So we're talking about skilling students. What is the way to involve industry to be able to develop skill sets that are almost future-proof and to facilitate students who are graduating able to make a global impact, not just an impact in their own little geographies?
Thank you for the question and the opportunity. There are two sets of answers that I would like to highlight. I myself also a graduate from the University of Pune and then went on to do my master's at this University of Western Australia in Perth. one of the key differences that I identified while studying both here in India and in Australia is the the way you are judged when you're sitting in a classroom. So, for example, in a typical MBA class, in addition to just preparing for the exams and scoring your marks, there is an equal weightage given to class participation. And what that means is you have to contribute to the class discussions, and you are encouraged to do so and assessed throughout your MBA during by your professors. So that's one of the key differences where we're talking about interpersonal skills, soft skills development, adding value to the conversation, which ultimately you're pushed through those situations, which leads you to go out and about and voice your opinions. Coming back to your second question, which is, landscape of education and professional development has gone through significant changes in the recent years. The decreasing half-life of skills, digital revolution, and the rapid pace of technological advancements have significantly impacted the job market, creating a need for continuous upskilling and reskilling. Traditional degree programs may not be able to cater to these dynamic demands in the workforce, and hence micro-credentials and short courses have emerged as a promising solution, enabling learners to acquire specific skills and knowledge in a shorter time frame. Recognizing this paradigm shift, the university has begun offering micro-credentials from 2020 onwards, demonstrating our commitment to being at the forefront of educational innovation. The UWA Plus courses facilitate a future-focused approach to lifelong learning by forging pathways for individuals from their journey towards, into, and through university to their journey back post-graduation. In today's knowledge-based economy, individuals need constantly upgrading their skills and knowledge to adapt to changing industry demands. Working with our industry partners to develop these UWA Plus offerings from short courses to micro-credentials, which then scaffold into full degree courses, cater to the needs of professionals seeking to upskill or reskill, thereby contributing to their employability and career advancements. According to the World Economic Forum, by 2027, over 60% of employees will require significant upskilling to remain competitive in the workforce. In 2021, the global micro and alternative credentials market was projected to reach $20 billion by 2025. So many professionals are now seeking lifelong learning opportunities to enhance their knowledge, develop new skills, and increase their chances of career advancements or transitioning to a different field altogether. However, lifelong learning is not solely focused on professional growth. It is also appealing to individuals who have a genuine interest in acquiring new knowledge and skills to enrich their lives and pursue personal passions. In addition to demographic changes such as aging populations, longer life expectancies, meaning that individuals are looking for opportunities for personal fulfillment and stay mentally active, engaged, and socially connected. So these rapid technological advancement and automation are reshaping industries, creating a demand for new skills. Individuals need to upskill or reskill to remain competitive in the job market, and hence emerging technologies such as AI, blockchain, data analytics are evolving and reshaping our industries, creating new job roles which did not exist 10 years ago. So the UWA Plus lifelong learning and continuing education offerings cater to a diverse range of learners, including professionals seeking to acquire new skills, individuals interested in personal development and lifelong learnings, alumni who are looking for opportunities to engage with the university and stay connected, and individuals seeking pathways into further studies. So with that is something UWA did a few years back and may revisit in the near future is setting up agreements with industry to offer discounts to staff working in those organizations for micro-credentials and short courses to upskill. Some of these companies I would like to name out here are Accenture Australia, Baker Hughes, BHP, Chevron, HBAS, Insurance Commission of Western Australia, and Siemens Mobility. So over to you, Ravan.
Thanks, Ruthvik. Susi, then coming to you from the perspective of TCS. I think from all of the panel today, Rama hit it on the head when she said that the reason we can't involve industry that efficiently in India is IP protection and having a framework for trust. You have done a lot of work at TCS in the last 21 years. You have helped develop labs at academia. You've helped change curriculums within universities. I want to just focus on that question because I think it's the crux of everything that is being discussed here. It's the framework that does not exist to help protect the intellectual property. Have you done anything in this field that helps you protect your intellectual property from the students that work for you? Or have you got a perspective from the view of TCS of what industry and academia can do without waiting for government, because the country works despite the government, to make this happen?
Thank you. Our CTO team, like R&D division, which is, we have a TRDDC here in Pune itself. I think it is one of our flagship organization within TCS. And Research and Development Corporation, I think we started this 35 years back. We collaborate with academia, and we hire the best of the best brains from academia. They are part of our research and development. It's been there for the last 35 years. Some of the products which we gotten, right? I think like Ms. Rama was saying, yes, we signing the NDA and knowing the risks, and we took some of the risks, and some of our products, I think, right, it came from our TRDDC labs. And those products became 100+ million products for TCS. I think it is there. So we have been doing in India, as well as we have been partnering with CMU in US and some of the universities in Europe also, right? So this is really important. So that's why I think in TCS, we follow this CLIF framework, right? One is the communication and awareness, which we talk about, we talk to the academia, what kind of partnership which we have. We engage with the leadership of the institutes, academic institutes. We want the value-based symbiotic relationship. I think that is very, very important. Someone was talking about the values. Value-based symbiotic relationship is important. That's why India, we have thousands of academic institutions, and across the world, we have, again, same numbers. We don't engage with all the universities. We cannot do also, right? I think we have more than, 250 institutes. We have a close collaboration for long. And in fact, the last 3 years, we have done, almost 2,500 institutes got benefited because of our programs and the lab setup and the intellectual support which we are providing. More than 539,000 students got benefited through our programs, right? And we are part of 652 institutes' academic boards, right? Academic boards in designing the curriculum and coming up with the value-added courses, and for arts and science and engineering and pharma, because we have requirements in all the spaces, like digital engineering. We are doing projects for defense. So we have been collaborating with some of the institutes on the research and innovation also, but the number is limited. Like doctor was saying, right? We have to take care of our core business, which is like services. And the leadership, we also develop, the number is very little, but compared to this, but our bread and butter is services. So we need to take care of that. And recently, the national education policy helps us to, contribute more from the industry is the professor of practice, right? I think we are identifying more professors of practice from our company, and who would be part of the academia. They spend 15 hours and they run 1 credit course or 2 credit course in a year or 2. And that is going to help the academia in a big way. That is going to be the key for industry and academia collaboration to happen more, because the country like India, each institute needs one professor of practice from industry. So that's where the NEP is going to help the academia to a great extent. And finally, like I think we always look forward to help in setting up the labs, and provided the point which everyone wants to make, I think is a value-based relationship is very, very important. And Tata values is giving back to the society. Our company and a lot of companies are, they want to give back to the society and academia. And the great opportunity, and definitely everyone is realizing its importance, and we will focus more on this space and collaborate more.
Thanks, Susi. I want to probe this subject a little bit further before we go to the next question, and so I'm going to come to Manoj. You're heading Persistent University, and the reality is you have Persistent University because you need to train the students that come in to your organization and reskill them for what you need them to do. And we've had two statements here on the problems, right? We've had Sudhir saying the problem is we preach to each other, industry preaches to academia and gets preached back. And then we had a wonderful statement from Dr. Raman who said industry is only looking for coolies, bums on seats really, to be filling the large growth curves that we're all having. So from your perspective, you're hands-on on this very problem. Those two statements, how would you juxtapose them and your view on them?
Yeah, so I think what I just want to get your question right. If you don't mind repeating that, can you just repeat what you?
There were two statements here. One is the reason it's not working is because we preach to each other. And then there is an academia view that says industry is only looking for coolies. I'm sure industry has a very different view. I'm interested in your view on that.
Yeah, sure.
And so to give some light to both of these statements.
Okay. So, when I actually got this topic, there's so many things were going on in my mind, right? And I didn't know where to start. I think somewhere when it comes to the whole topic of this gap between academia and industry, I think somewhere we are also missing out the faculty. And I don't know, maybe we should actually talk a little bit about that. I think we have been kind of hammering down, what students don't have. Where is the gap? How can we bridge? How can we do mentorship, et cetera, et cetera. But I think what is also worthwhile thinking about is how can we bring in faculty internship? Because I think, if you look at, Persistent, as I said, for all of us, our hands are tied, we have limited bandwidth, right? If I have to tie up, if I have to run internship programs, my business leaders and engineers won't have enough time to mentor, right? So I think one influencer that I see in this entire equation is the faculty. And if we can actually spend good amount of time in actually bridging that gap through the faculty, because they influence, it's almost like the span of control, right? So they influence hundreds of students at a time. So in fact, when we did the faculty development program in Persistent University, this was the ask from the faculty that can we do internship with you? And we said, we'll welcome you with both our arms, right? Because I think that's very important. Secondly, I think the whole, this forever debate of the gap between curriculum, what we expect, what academia has to offer. I think, it requires a lot more closer working of academia with what is actually happening in industry. So I was actually talking to some of the faculty outside, and I was amazed to see the kind of work that is happening in, for example, AI/ML within Symbiosis. But the question is so while that work is happening in the research and development and there is a lot of funding, but is that something flowing down to the classrooms, right? I don't know, right? So for example, as we speak, we are actually running a technothon, which is kind of a hackathon on generative AI across hundreds of our employees, right? And we are trying to figure out, nobody knows what the hell it is, right? And we don't know what it is going to be, right? How is it going to impact? So I think if these things can also be in parallel experimented within academia and embed those topics into the curriculum. I think it will be phenomenal, right? Because what happens typically, and as most of us have resonated, right? I don't think I'm too much worried about teaching them technology. I think that is the easiest thing they can learn, and that's the fastest thing. But what I think you also mentioned, Bhavna, was the skills, right? And when it comes to, and I have seen it in some of the institutions, and very interestingly, I think some couple of universities in the north that I have seen in Jaipur, where they have centers of excellence in critical thinking, design thinking, problem solving, right? And that is one thing which I see terribly missing when it comes to our Indian students. When we conduct similar semicolons, or we call them semicolons and hackathons and technothons, we give them about 3 days, right? And give them a problem statement. Okay, go figure it out, talk to the product owner, talk to the business SME, and understand the problem. And we get amazed when you go second day, talk to them. Can you explain the problem that you're working on? It takes them 15, 20 minutes, and yet they are not able to explain what they're working on. So I'm not worried about the technology, if you ask me. It is the whole comprehension. It is also about, I really want people to be playing different roles in academia, right? Play the role of a business, analyst. Understand what the business needs are, understand what the customer needs are. And I think that is where we need to probably spend a lot more time in developing those skills. Technology is the easiest thing one can learn, if you ask me. And we spend a lot more time, inducting these people into the real world, as we keep calling it, right? We spend about 3-4 good months before they are ready to be deployed on projects, right?
Excellent point, Manoj. And I'm going to come to Dr. Raman for a comment. We've heard of faculty internships. We've heard of how Israel does it differently, with faculty moving about from industry, government, back into faculty. Your thoughts on whether this happens and how this might help or could be put in place?
I completely agree when it comes to exposure of faculty to industry. That's absolutely needed. If you ask a student who's pursuing his engineering in India or an MBA, if they aspire to become teachers, possibly it's less than 1%. That's what is the actual stat. Why? Because this is not lucrative for them. It is the industry that is lucrative. So if good people have to come back to teaching, it is only after they complete their possibly 25 years in the industry, and they kind of think teaching is easy. They think teaching is easy, and then they come back and say that I want to teach back in the class. But this is changing today. If you look at institutions like Symbiosis, where we are collaborating, or faculty students are collaborating in solving real-time problems. For example, the traffic problem in Pune, students used AIML and did something and presented to the traffic commissioner telling how can this problem be solved using AIML. This is a live project that's done by the faculty members and students, and they are submitting it as a solution to a problem that the society is facing. But it's only in some institutions like the Symbiosis International University. But there are many more if you look at the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, where you have management institutions, you have engineering colleges, where first is they don't have teachers to teach. And those who teach are really not fully equipped to teach that subject from an industry perspective. So that's a big problem. If this has to change, education is regulated in this country, but not regulated to the extent that you must pay a 7th pay for sure to every faculty member. That's not regulated. That is left out. It's to your convenience. If you want, you can pay it. If you don't. But if you want to go and join a corporate like Persistent or TCS, I mean, there is no limit. The HR bargains and say, if I want to get a talent, I'll go to whatever extent to get this talent. If that happens, that's the reason that you got some of the institutions in this country where you have fabulous teachers, but there are 80% of them where they're still struggling to get good teachers to teach the students. So if this changes, and if this becomes a lucrative opportunity, then faculty internship will become default. People from the industry will jump and take these opportunities today. If I go back to Persistent, people who are interested in teaching, don't take me wrong, and I'll say, I'll give you 5x, come join me. I'm sure people start thinking, right? Because that matters a lot. So that's where I find that the good talent is not coming here to teach when I talk about the 80% of educational institutions. So for them, if industry is able to bring in some internship, that will be of great value. We have a lot of faculty members who have left the corporate and joined not at 55, not at 58, but at 42, 43. This shows that they are passionate, and industry is giving talent to institutions like Symbiosis to close that gap. But I completely agree with Mr. Manoj when he talks about internship needed for majority of institutions in this country. Otherwise, this gap will continue to exist.
Go ahead, please, Manoj.
And just another point I want to add, and all of us are willing to volunteer. And I think what is also essential for academia is to bring in a lot of pragmatic approach in teaching. I'll give you my own son's example, second year engineering. And so he's studying in one of the colleges in Pune. So I think the whole pedagogy, the whole methodology, and that's where I'm going back to the faculty internship. How do you make it more meaningful? How do you make it more real, right? I mean, do you really want to still fall back using, slide after slide? Or you really want to give them the real-time examples, gamify it, right? Can we also bring in some of those interesting, methodologies in our teaching itself? Because that itself will make them much more, relevant. Because I think that's the gap that I see, where I actually ended up teaching him for 4 hours project management and software engineering. And he said, it's very easy. I said, yes, it is very easy. It's not difficult. He said, I didn't understand anything in the college. And I said, yes, because it was slide after slide, right? So I think that's another thing we should actually collaborate and see how it can be made more interesting. It's the simple concepts, but simplified, right, in teaching.
Excellent comment there, Manoj. And I think you'll find a lot of Indian students who study their undergraduate in India and then go overseas to do their postgraduate suddenly start to shine while having struggled through the process here of rote learning, because suddenly they're being tested on their application of knowledge rather than their memory of the knowledge. And I've seen that story repeatedly come back. I'm going to pose the last question to Bhavna before we open the questions to the floor, to the audience. So I'd encourage the audience to think about any questions you might have whilst Bhavna is answering. We have about 10 minutes that we can spare on it. Bhavna, the fintech industry didn't come from universities. Yeah, it came because your industry sector developed it because it needed those kinds of algorithms and skill sets. Yet your industry also has seen the most amount of turmoil since 1997. Every 10 years, in fact, you can even count it down, the pendulum swings and something crazy happens. How has this evolved in your industry sector, and what needs to happen between universities and the finance sector in order to develop programs that develop a stronger understanding of finance markets, risk management, and the emerging trends within your industry sector?
Thanks, Ravin. Just to talk about some of the key trends in the industry, the first one is obviously the rise of fintechs, the advent of AI, digital transformation. Another key theme that's emerging in the financial services industry is sustainability and ESG, or what we call environment, social governance goals, which are now a part of almost every industry in India and across the world. There's also a lot of data, analytics, integrity, cybersecurity, and there are new opportunities, new customer segments with the evolution of the metaverse, which we haven't really seen how it's going to impact and what role banks and other financial institutions will play there. But it has an intimate linkage to NFTs, cryptocurrencies, and consequently, the younger generation who will be the target segment there. And all of this is in a very complex regulatory geopolitical landscape. And last but not the least is the talent management. And like Manoj said, essentially upskilling people to adapt to this changing environment. So in terms of teaching these courses, when I was at university, which was quite a few years ago, but today teaching students how to calculate a financial ratio or tally a balance sheet or explain how a financial valuation model works. It's actually, there's no point in teaching them that. You have technology to give you all of that on a ready platter. It's how you use that information to take a decision. And I think also when we have practical assignments at universities, most students would be given a common goal to get a proposal, just to give an example, a business proposal over the line. But in terms of the teaching methodology, what will help is to make that more nuanced. If you are looking or evaluating a company as an investor versus a regulator versus a trader or a credit risk officer, you are going to be looking at that entity completely differently. If you had to put your own money and put value company, what is the value that you would assign? If you saw that things were not going well enough, what would you change? So it needs to be, a very practical, real-life statements and scenarios, which I think information access is available to all. It's how you're able to translate that into decision-making and understand that in the real world, you're working in a very collaborative setup and working with stakeholders who might not necessarily have the same motivations that you do. So it's about working with multiple stakeholders and using negotiating, influencing skills to be able to present your best case. Also, in terms of content, I think financial services courses definitely need to include sustainability, like I mentioned. I think there is no industry, country in the world today which does not have that as a key focus area. It's no longer a motherhood statement or something restricted to the C-suite. We have to design solutions because it's a part of every individual KRAs across industries. Yeah, I think that's really what I'd like to say. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Bhavna. Does the audience have any questions? There's a couple of hands up here. If a mic could go there. In the meantime, may I ask, whilst the mic is coming there, may I ask Sudhir to maybe comment on industry trends in your sector and how AI might impact that very briefly?
So I don't want to stand between questions, and I think it's better to give the floor for questions, but very shortly let me answer. So I think it's very clear that AI will change almost everything, and several of the speakers mentioned it, which basically means that all of us as much need to get educated. Personally, I've spent at least 2 hours a day during the last 6 months understanding what that is, and I would still claim to know nothing. It's changing so rapidly, it's changing by the day, and I think it will change how all of us learn, it will change how all of us work. For universities, somebody was speaking about examinations and the whole process. Examinations are actually going to become redundant in many ways. So it's equally important that I think, again, coming back to the same point, all of us need to sit down at a table and figure out what is really important for us. Universities, to a great extent, had become funnels for employment, where the best people go into the best institutions which are pre-selected, and they spend more time trying to get into those institutions. Once they get into those institutions, they're so tired that they spend the next 1 year kind of relaxing and then getting ready for their next recruitments. I think this is something which will have to change. And the other thing is interdisciplinary kinds of things, which again, why do people go abroad for education? One of the main reasons is in MIT, you can walk into a science lab and the next day walk into a literature lab and the third day walk into something which is history. We've started to do a lot more of this in India, where there is training across disciplines. And if we want to be a leader in education, I'd just like to end with one major statement that as a country, we have to start thinking of this not for profit, but for leadership. Can India be a leader in education? We are producing numbers, huge numbers. The world looks at us for education. Symbiosis is one of the few examples. We have many foreign students coming into Symbiosis, and that's wonderful. But we are sending, 200,000, 300,000 students abroad. Our first thing I would do is to actually ask these people, why are you going abroad? What is it that we can do to keep you here? Not because we don't want them to get the exposure, but because we want our educational system to be the same where all of those, many of those can be here. So I think we'll find a lot of the answers there. And eventually, can we become the educational hub? One of the things I keep talking about is our city. Our city really has the potential. We are known as the Oxford of the East. Okay, that's a nice name, but we all know that we have a lot to do to deserve that name. But maybe in 20 years, can it be the other way around? What is it that would make our city as one of the major educational hubs of the world? We have all of the elements here. We have smart people, we have excellent academic institutions, we have amazing companies, we have the availability of students to be able to come in from all around the world. So I think if we change our kind of reset our mindset, and I think it's institutions like Symbiosis which have the possibility to be able to do this, to really aspire to become the great institutions of the world.
Thanks, Sudhir. So audience questions, we have time for maybe 2 or 3. There's a hand up over here. If you could please introduce yourself and then state the panel member that the question's for.
Okay, similar to like a theme of this like session and panel discussion, most of the government funding agency in India, like DBT, Department of Biotechnology, Department of Science and Technology, they are trying to promote industry and academia collaboration. But there are some like certain region, they are saying like at least industry to pay like 15% cost of the total project. So do you think, is it inhibitory or stimulatory for the industry?
Do you have a certain member of the panel you want to address this, or can anyone take
Anybody can give the answer.
Ladies and gentlemen.
So as far as government and business collaboration goes, I think it's done in pockets. For example, we work on certain projects for defense, for nuclear, and certain PSUs, create that kind of conducive environment. Department of Atomic Energy is very good. NPCIL is very good. BARC is very good. So they have, methods that allow companies like us to actually do new product development for them. They do give subsidies. They do give grants for new product development. In fact, so much so that they actually give grants for setting up entire factories for, helping them meet their requirements. So, but that happens in pockets. I don't believe we have a uniform policy.
Does anybody else want to take that question? Okay, we'll take the next question. We have.
Sorry, I volunteer. Can I go first? Okay. Do you want to go first? Go ahead. I'll ask after.
Yeah, hi. My name is Siddharth. A lot was spoken about the intellectual property of the organizations and involving students early on. My question is, what about the rights of the students? What about the intellectual property rights of the students? Like, for example, we have got a lot of young minds who come up with brilliant ideas. So do you think as industry, like when we talk about research and development, these students will hide those ideas, or maybe they'll be, cheated out of their ideas at some stage? I mean, how do you protect them? This is my question. And second, there's another part to it. Like, I teach at a university, and most of my students who come back from internship complain about non-learning repetitive jobs and long hours, where they're not learning enough, which leads them to eventually leave the industry. So how does the industry deal with it?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I think Rama hit it on the head when she said framework. Framework to protect the intellectual property. This is for profit in the end. So if you're getting somebody developing intellectual property, it ends up being for the company you work for. But I'm going to ask Sudhir first to comment on that, maybe Rama after that.
Let me comment on the IP one first. So I think while we are talking about IP protection, let's also be clear that 95 to 99% of companies in India have deep protection for IP. As a country, this is why a lot of work is coming to India. There is a very good understanding of IP. We support an incubator as a company, and we have 80 startups in the city of Pune. And out of these, about 30 are working on EV technology. Many are working on agriculture and social entrepreneurship. And I can tell you that every year, many of them are generating IPs, and we are helping them to do that. It's not expensive. In India, to get an IP registered can cost you a few lakh rupees. We are ready to help. Symbiosis has again institute there. So for somebody who wants to do it, these are all excuses. And secondly, to come back to your question of working hard, if somebody doesn't want to work hard, don't come and do an internships. I think life is too hard for all this. If you want to face a real life world, you're young people, be prepared to work hard. If you're not prepared to work hard, then stay at home. So sorry to be so direct. I think people need, at this age, people need to work. Okay, if they're working on, if they're being made to do photocopying, that's a separate issue. But if you're going to learn, you have to learn that life is hard. If you want to do development, you want to do IP, you have to work 16, 18, 20 hours a day. It does not come with working 8 to 5.
I'm going to ask Rama to comment, and then I've seen that Matthew's picked up his mic as well. So Matthew, after that.
That's an interesting question. And I think why we do, these type of collaborations abroad is because those universities have a very good understanding that this is a business transaction. They understand that the industrial partner is the one providing the jobs for their students. So think of it from a customer and product kind of scenario, right? The university's product is what? Is the student. Your customer is the industrial partner. And just like companies like us, we have to fall in line with the customer requirements. If the customer is not interested in your product, that's possibly because the product is not up to the mark, or the product is given to the customer under, not very beneficial terms and conditions. So it's literally a business transaction. If students have this concern about their rights, about their IP, I think one fundamental understanding is that they're able to develop all of that because of the opportunity, because of the money that the industrial partner pours into that collaboration. And if they're not okay with that IP being owned by the industrial partner, then they should not take part in such collaborations. They should not be students that work in such labs. And that's very similar to how industry works with government or any other partner, right? When we work on projects of national security, government owns all the IP. They very clearly tell us, if you don't want to give us the IP, don't take part in this tender, don't take part on this project.
In fact, also all HR, all the agreements to employ today cover intellectual property rights and very specifically state that any intellectual property developed by the employee will end up being owned by the organization. Before I come to you, sir, right in front, I want to labor on the second part of your question, which was the gophers or the photocopying machines or interns being taken into organizations for 6-8 weeks and really not learning much. And I want to pose that question to both Manoj and Bhavna, because I'm sure you'll have two very different perspectives. It is in fact difficult. You get young students, they are not very skilled, they're brought in, thrown into the organization, and they very typically the organization will go, well, here's a report, go research it on the internet and write out and tell me what's going on. And yes, I do understand how they would come back and say, I really didn't learn much because I could have done that without going there. Your thoughts on how you manage it both at Persistent and ANZ?
Okay, so at Persistent, we have tried a couple of models. One was a typical where the students come in, they are assigned a project, a mentor. So that is something that we have tried, and honestly, it doesn't work so well because, see, for us, as I said earlier, mentors who are on full-time roles, they have their day job. Becomes very difficult for them to kind of spend that kind of time with the students. That's our practical constraint, right? I think it is also important in that model to, in fact, train students, how to be a mentee. Because, mentors don't have time. And if you don't ask them the right questions, and if you don't seek their right guidance, I think mentors will never have time. So that is one thing which we have tried to experiment. It has not worked. But the other model is typically we put them through a rigorous training, right, as part of the internship. So we give them a whole bunch of projects in groups. They go through virtual and in-person classroom trainings. That has worked fairly well. But I don't think that's what the students are actually looking for.
Thanks. Bhavna, your thoughts?
I think today, the trend on internships, it's essentially moved from earlier paid internships to unpaid internships. And I think, similar to what Manoj said, for a lot of the short-term internships, it is actually a time and it's a little bit of a luck of the draw. If you have somebody who is committed to growth of the student, then the student can benefit. But the trend that I've seen across a lot of the unpaid internships that we get, that it's more CV building exercise and more, so it's taken very passively. And just to give my own example, even when I was doing my MBA and I was interning with a bank, I was actually given a project to do a feasibility study on the launch of a digital platform. And the platform had already, it was on its way to marketing. So it was more post facto academic exercise, which me and another student, we had to jointly produce a report, which could then just be filed. So it was very demoralizing as a student, to be in that environment. But I think there's a 50-50 blame on both sides. Increasingly, students view it, as something that they can mention on their forms, and organizations actually view it as something which takes away from their core activity.
Thanks. Susi, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, we give almost 3,000 internship every year, right? I think the different models, like Manoj was talking about, one is we give minimum of summer internship is 2 months, and a winter internship is 6 months to sometime, I think, master's degree 11 months to 12 months. I think that is what the models which we think, the time frame. And like only 30% of the internship, they are actually working on problems, because the customer problems, we cannot put them directly. The customer project, we cannot put them directly because of the various reasons, right? I think the NDAs and other things. So the rest of the 70% we ask them to develop the tools, and we make them part of the internal platforms. So that way they learn and they know the culture, they know how we work. I think that is going to help us in putting them into projects after they come. But the 30%, I think they get that real exposure, and for the 3,000 number internship, 30% is a good number for us, I think.
Thanks, Susi. There was a lady with a question at the back, and based on how it goes, if there's still time, we'll take the last one in the front here.
Thank you so much for this discussion. I'm Dr. Sonal Shri, and I teach HR and leadership at SIBM Pune. So there are just 2 pointers here. One is that I realize both the parties, there are smarter people on both the sides, industry as well as academics. And both are real worlds. It's just that we don't really understand it together. So my question is that, considering that everybody has shortage of time, how can we materialize this, that the students as well as faculty members, and the same likewise from the industry, can all experienced professionals come together and decide what is real and what is not, and what works and what doesn't?
Manoj, do you want to start with that?
And Manoj sir, I'm so thankful to you for raising the issue of the involvement of the faculty members.
Thanks. So I think one thing which, we are all short on time. I mean, there is no doubt about it. So one thing which we are experimenting with COEP, where we are doing an MTech program for our students, and Dr. Anand being an influential personality and has that inclination towards education, right? So we keep experimenting a lot of things. One of the things that we're trying out is, you have people who are studying and taking up courses from the industry, and then you have the regular students, right? Mix them up, right? So if you mix them up, there is the kind of discussions you will have in the assignments and the projects would be very practical, and it will be a great learning for both people who are having industry experience and those who don't have the industry experience, right? And similarly, even for the research projects that are done, I think if they can be mixed up with some of the industrial mentors, because I think that is what probably will make it a little workable and scalable in my view.
Thanks, Manoj. Dr. Raman, do we have time for one more question? 2 more questions. All right. So we've got one here and one here. So, yeah. Can we have the mic come over here, please?
Okay, mine isn't so much a question, but to appreciate you. I'm a permanent secretary in charge of education, and I'm listening to your conversation. I'm saying industry is saying this, and the faculties would probably do this. But we're trying to answer then the bigger question from the ideas you've given us. It tells us where the gap is. It also tells us what we can do. And for me, I admire India for one thing. You are being candid about what's your problem. You're also saying, where can we go? And you're saying there are better lessons out there. So I think this is a positive discussion to have. Don't think about the impossibles. What you've shared with us today tells us it can be done. But we need to find an input of the recipient of your skills, the provider of the skills, in order to answer your big economic engagement. So for me, I think it's been a very enriching discussion, and much more that I'm carrying my team from the university. Back home, I want to cause a discussion about how do I make my universities relevant to the education we provide to the citizenry. So I just want to appreciate you, and I think it was worth coming all the way from Lusaka, Zambia, up to here, Penu in India. I've enjoyed my day. Thanks for the education.
Yeah, this is Professor Ujjwal Chaudhary. I represent two universities, Daffodil International University of Dhaka and its sister university, International Online University, Dubai. Very good. I echo his voice. It's a very useful discussion that we had. By the way, I'm very proud to be the former dean of this university as well. There are 2 points that I wanted to bring up. The discussion has been more from the industry perspective because most of the speakers represent the industry. From the university also, there are certain issues that we need to look at. For example, the professor of practice has been just now brought in by the UGC, hardly being practiced, and if so practiced, largely the retired industry people are being, or almost retired industry people are being hired. So the whole idea of bringing in working people at a younger age with certain competencies which can upgrade the level of the university, that isn't happening. That's something that we need to look at. Most Indian universities, even the good ones, the patent culture is still very nascent, except a few like Shulani University, which has got more than 1,600 patents. Hardly is there in the country. That's another. Incubation Innovation Center is more a building than an action. So first an action has to be done, and then the industry would come in. Yes, industry's investment has to be there for meaningful innovation and incubation. Labs and talent for applied research. So one of the things in the Western world is that they tie up with the universities for newer products. I mean, the biggest and the nearest example is the COVID vaccines. Almost all the vaccines have come with association of the universities and the industry. The research has been done in the universities. Hardly that thing. There is a trust deficit from the industry also, and there is a competency deficit from the universities also. That's something that we need to really look at. And on the university front, the last thing is ethical AI integration with education hasn't been happening. It's too recent. Unfortunately, in the West, the industry follows the university work, research. Here we are the tail ender of the industry. The university is the tail ender of the industry. On the industry, because you are largely from the industry, you have a trust deficit with the university. So going beyond the IITs and IIMs, the trust deficit is not just of the framework, absence of the framework of association and IPR, which is very rightly told. But apart from that, going beyond the IITs and IIMs, you have largely a trust deficit with the Indian higher education system. Because to break that deficit, there has to be competency mapping. At least give the competencies to the university that please prepare your products, to use the word product, though I would like to avoid using product for human beings. But you make your talent mapped or in consonance with this competency. So please do a competency mapping or listing with the universities. Then the trust deficit can be perhaps broken. And surely, like the West, there has to be far more investment in higher education by the industry, like the West. So it's a mutual thing. There are no two sides, both are on the same sides. How can the industry further invest? That's the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there's one last question, and that's from an international student here. We'll take that question before we close.
Okay, my name is Peter's Delight from Nigeria, final year student of Symbiosis School of Culinary Art. My question is this. I have two questions regarding the internship. So during our internships, our college work stops totally, and we just focus on the internship because it will be so much work for us. But this time around, we're having industry academia engagement involving more project work, more programs for the students, because the 6 months we have for internship is not enough to have that experience to make us go into the workforce. So now that we come back to college and these programs are involved, these projects are introduced, and we still have our normal syllabus, which are pretty tight, and we don't have much time, much space. So is this new introduction, these programs, going to affect the syllabus, or will it just be just an extra load? The students have to work more instead of closing classes by 4. They have to spend more time, or is there any adjustment or modification that will be made in the syllabus or in the curriculum to make them combine the two? And secondly is this, so as an international student studying in India, we have this challenge of during internship and during work period after college, placement, having opportunity to work. So during the last event we had, G20 event, the foreign minister of India said they are trying to create a policy for us to be able to work after school. So now we're having industry academia engagements and introduction of these policies. Are we going to benefit from it? Because as a student, international student, and we love this company in India, and we would like to continue after internship, but due to the policy, it's not allowed, and we have to travel back to our countries. So is there any arrangement or anything the university or the industry can do for skilled and talented international students to be able to continue in their industry of choice? Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks very much for a great question. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone from the Indian government here to be able to answer the second part of the question. I think Susi's picked up the phone. The mic, I'm going to ask you to comment, and then also Dr. Raman to talk about the workload balance and changes in curriculum to allow for greater internships. But first, Susi.
Yeah, the internship, I think in India, the 6 months internship, they do only internship. They'll get enough credits for that, I think, doing that. There is no, maybe one or two papers will be there. I think they can do that so that they can focus on learning as well as the skill building during the internship. That is one. Second is we partnered with ISEC, I think one of the largest student body organization. We give internship. We bring them to India for 12 months, 11 months, I think, based on the internship, the visa. And we give enough training. They are part of our system and programs. And since we have operations in 50, 60 countries. So we hire them, if they are fit, we hire them back in those countries. And like you mentioned, still the government has not yet come up with a policy. And because the pay and other things are different. So typically what we do is, we give the internship for the foreign students through this ISEC, and then take them into the respective countries, because the visa part and other things are playing a major role here, right? So it will take time to come up with the policy.
Thanks. I'll ask Dr. Raman to comment on the first part of the question, which was the balancing the curriculum.
So at Symbiosis, we have something called experiential learning, which becomes a part of the credit. In fact, across all subjects, for every credit, 1 credit is 15 hours here at the postgraduate level. So if you're looking at experiential learning, that is 3 hours. So if it is a 2 credit, 6 hours goes for experiential learning. So answering your question, it is kind of balanced, but if you have something more, we always involve students when we take input for changes that are expected by the students, which is always given by a student representative. But as of now, I told you that there is an experiential learning component which becomes a part and parcel of the credit structure, which is basically used for getting such experience which is live, right? But if you have something more, it's welcome, and we are ready to make such changes which can be more beneficial for students, especially from the streams like culinary arts. That's my response to your question.
So ladies and gentlemen, with that, we're out of time. I want to thank our panel, Bhavna, Susi, Rutvik, Manoj, Matthew, Rama, and Sudhir for having made time from a time-poor context in their daily jobs to come here and share their gyan. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you also for having made the time to be an audience in this panel. Now over to Anita for taking this forward.
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Raman and Raveen, for an absolutely brilliant panel. I think frank, brutally honest at times, but definitely a lot of food for thought for all of us. Vice Chancellor, Dr. Rajni, may I request you to come on stage and a small token of our appreciation to this panel. Dr. Sudhir Mehta. Rama Kirloskar. His Excellency Matthew Johnston. Mr. Manoj Apte. Mr. Rutvik Punglia. Dr. K.M. Susi. Bhavna Manmani. With loads of affection, Raveen, for a wonderful job. And Dr. Raman. You should Insta these pictures immediately because something thought-provoking has happened here.